Hi everyone. I feel like we're not a one-hit wonder anymore. We've got past the first episode. Thank you for Lee if you're watching. I think that was very, very well received. So obviously, I want to do more of this. But today we've moved on and progressed to episode two of Startup Today. My name is Matt, sales manager at Tekkon, and we're very, very lucky to have Kale Miller, who I've known for all the extra long
the
time of what,
the 12 months
15
or so we
months?
figured out. Yeah, we haven't known
Yes,
each other that long, which seems
that's right.
crazy given how much we
That's right.
chat.
And it's kind of like what we've done a bit of a switcher because you've come to Perth and I've gone to Sydney.
We almost
Yeah,
could have high-fived in the air on the way over, but no, we
almost,
had we had the
almost.
12 months of overlap, 15 months of overlap,
That's
fortunately.
right. So for anyone who's not aware of what Tekkon does, we do we do remote developer recruitment. So we have a team in Nepal and we help startups get access to cost-effective developers. We try to provide the employee experience, so always looking at long-term hires over short-term contractors. But today we're talking about data and Kale Miller, who does the podcast called the Small Business CTO, is also the founder of Prometheus AI, which he's much better positioned to explain than me, especially as a data and AI ML specialist. So, yeah, Kale, that's probably a good prompt for you to go ahead and
Sure.
explain what you do, explain a little bit of the podcasts that you do, and then also Prometheus as well.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I'm Kale Miller. I run Prometheus AI. I've been running that business now for about 5 odd years. So, I started in 2020. The cool story behind that is I quit my job and lined up a client at the end of 2019, start of 2020. Was all excited to go. This is in Feb 2020 in Sydney, and then there was lockdown in March 2020 in Sydney. And I thought it was all over for me, being the naive 20 something year old with about 5 grand to my name, but it all kind of panned out. So, yep, I run Prometheus AI. I've been running that for about 5 years. We just help organizations do data and AI. So what that means is maybe it's a bit of AI readiness. So, hey, I would like to do AI, but I don't have a data warehouse. I don't have integrations. I don't have all these important foundational pieces. So we help set all that up. We do proof of concepts. So things like, I would like to build this AI, but I don't have any engineers that are skilled enough to do it, or they don't really know how to do it. So we come in, set that up, and then go, here's how you would run that longer term. And then the last piece is probably my favorite piece, which is engineering culture. So go in and go, how do you build an engineering team? How do you build a data team in particular? How do you get guys out of building the 12-month AI model to how do we deliver every 2 weeks and
Right,
focus more on like problem, things like that.
sure.
Maybe Small Business CTO podcast. It's a bit of a cross post here, but I
Mhm.
also run the Small Business CTO podcast where I translate kind of technical concepts to a non-technical audience, kind of remove all the fluff and mystery behind it. What is tech debt? Like one of my favorite words. It's like
Right,
explaining what that actually is, so then a non-technical person can talk to their engineers a bit better.
awesome. And yeah, we'll link the podcast to this episode once we get it up and out to the, wonderful world that we live
Yep.
in. But yeah, so today we're talking about building a data culture. And I think that's a good segue. You kind of covered what you do in Prometheus AI, but we're also kind of covering a little bit of that in the episode, including, kind of where to start, a little bit on scaling, a little bit on governance, how to hire, maybe your first data, whether it's engineer, scientist, analyst, little bit on building the culture, a little bit on leading. Maybe it's a few mindset shifts, and then we'll close for a few takeaways. And maybe we'll do it a little bit more interactively. So if there's any key questions, especially on the topics that we cover, feel free to write your question in the chat. I'll be sure to monitor that and pick it up as we go. But we'll also have some time at the end, around 15 minutes for questions for the lovely Kale as well. So let's kick off. Um, so yeah, where should we start? I guess what what made you kind of choose the, let's say, data and AI career path,
Mm.
or make that as your kind of focus or area of specialty?
God, that's a great question. Sometimes a known fact, sometimes a little known fact is originally I studied physics, so I was a physicist. And My origin story is that I'd never really programmed as a child or anything, and I went to university. I was doing physics, and I went to do some research. And they're like, "Well, you're in the computational physics group. You're gonna have to learn Python." I went, "Okay, whatever. I'll learn that." Absolutely fell in love with programming, and honestly, from that point forward, I've coded almost every night. From that point forward, I got to the end of my career, went, physicists are not the easiest career to hire for. I'm sure you don't hear many open physics roles. So I went, what's a good mix of software and mathematics? Because that was kind of what I was good at. I went, it's the data career. So I went into that and kind of kept going that direction. I was very lucky that I had a strong engineering mindset and took that to a really data heavy world, which at the time when I broke into it was full of mathematics PhDs and they just were academics and writing code. That's kind of how I went down that pathway and kind of just managed to meld the two. And fortunately, 10 years later, it's a bit more mature and, my skill set really work well with that.
It's funny though, I remember you always telling me you love the sales side of things too.
Yeah.
So you play a bit in both worlds then?
Well, well, I think it's I'm a Perth boy originally, and I think if you lived in Perth without any social skills, you would not
Yeah.
survive very long. So
Okay.
I often consider myself an extrovert, a introvert in extrovert's clothing. I had to learn how to be
Right.
extroverted, but no, I love people and I love talking to people, and I think that's kind of why I do things like the Small Business CTO podcast. Is that you're able to take these really technical things, which are so interesting,
Mm.
and bring them to a broader audience. So I'm very lucky that AI is quite novel and quite complex at the moment, and I'm able to just bring that on to the masses and go, it's actually not that crazy. It's just a pattern recognition machine, and it's really cool.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about startups and
Mm,
context on, your experience with startups, and then maybe that's a segue into, what kind of shift is needed when you're starting to focus on the data element of a startup.
sure. So your question is like, what does a startup need from a
I guess
data
it's more
perspective?
like, I guess you've tried your own startup in the past.
Yeah,
I think you've worked with startups as well.
yeah.
So what's been your experience thus far? And then from what you've seen,
Mm,
how can startups start to prepare for, a shift or a focus towards
mm.
data? And we're talking day one, right? So,
Of course, yeah.
yeah.
I think that's kind of the cool thing about startups is that they're ultimately new worlds, that there's no legacy. And a lot of the data engineering community is concerned about how do we get the on-prem SQL database from, the BHPs of the world and put that in the
Mm,
cloud. A startup's quite lucky that they're effectively a greenfield. They can do whatever they want.
mm,
So that's really cool that you can design from day one to collect a lot more data and manage a lot more data, which I think is pretty cool. So maybe some good examples of stuff in the past is I worked for a crypto startup for many years as the head of their data and analytics engineering.
okay.
And it was just a case of going, how do we collect data from day one? So how do we make sure that we're mining data from our website, we're mining data from our user interactions, mining it from the chain, building a kind of repository. And we found that gave us a massive edge in the market and ultimately made us stand out that we were playing in the data space in the blockchain area. So
Mm,
that's kind of some cool opportunities in the startup space. And then what things should they consider from day one is maybe the next part of that question.
yep, that's right.
So I was kind of thinking about this before I came on. Like, what advice would I recommend a startup? Because all my clients these days are more established, older, larger organizations. And in the end, my controversial take was they somewhat shouldn't. I don't think it's actually that valuable in early days to think that hard about your data.
Mm,
You know, I'm sure Matt, you work in the startup space. You know that the most important thing is product market fit. It's getting your pricing right. It's getting your customers right. It's all these other pieces of the puzzle. And when I go to startups and talk to them for advice, I go, yeah, you could collect all your data. Yeah, you could take your one engineer, two engineers you have, and your 50 grand of seed funding and pour that all into building a data warehouse. Or you could just not. Like, you should be more focused on all the other important pieces. Data becomes valuable as you get bigger, ultimately,
mm,
not when you're small. When you're small, you're so close to the customer, you're so close to your niche that your intuition takes you a long way. Data basically enables you at scale to bring that back to that small early days. When you're at the 100 head count, you can drill into a customer's journey as if you were the one taking them through it, like day one of your startup.
Sure.
Whereas at day one, you're taking every customer through that journey. The data is somewhat irrelevant. It's more valuable as you scale.
Okay. So are we talking then ideally it's around what is it, Series B? Where would you
I
say?
I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think it's the
Yep.
point where you are not touching every part of a process. That's when it becomes super valuable to you.
Mm.
So, early days of a startup, and ideally through many, many years of your startup, you're touching so much of a sales process. There's not really that much of a point to collect sales data. But as you move off it, and you've got a sales team and a sales manager, at that point, you want to collect a lot more data so you can really drill into the customer journeys. You can really drill into their kind of performance and activities and being able to correlate inputs and outputs.
Hmm.
And at that point, that's when you would really start to worry a lot more about it. So it's not really Series A, Series B. If you get a startup that can exist off 3 people and be $1 billion unicorn, you may not need that much. I'm sure we'll come back to that when we talk about AI.
Sure.
You won't need that much. But as soon as you walk away from your engineering team, you walk away from your sales team, walk away from your operations team, at that point, start collecting your data and caring a lot more about it and governing it a lot better.
Okay. Cool. And are there any tools that then startups can take advantage of? I mean, if they wanted to start, tracking
Hmm.
metrics and useful info from day one, is there any tools that they could use in the early days to make their life a
Yeah.
little bit easier?
Well, I think just pick the easy stuff. Like a great example of that is Google Analytics. It's just
Yep.
out of the box. It works. You plug it into your app. You plug it into your website, and it gives you some initial
Mm.
dashboards and things like that. Another good little hack is a lot of your SaaS products have the ability to export data.
Hmm.
So maybe you've got your some supplier purchasing platform, so they maybe have like all of their products, and you're buying from a supplier, and you're kind of getting all your orders. That data typically you can get out of their system somehow, so you
Right.
can usually download it some way. That's another good thought. Is early download that. It's going to be relatively well structured, and then just throw it into a really simple BI tool like Google Looker Studio, Power BI,
Yeah.
Apache Superset, something like that. Just
Hmm.
play around with it and see if you get anything interesting from it.
Okay, cool. So maybe just for the people that have joined us, if you do have any questions, feel free to ask as we go, especially any topical stuff. There might be something that you're really dying to know. Otherwise, we will have Q&A at the end as well. So just feel free to type that in the chat. Moving on. So how do you I mean, we've talked about it a little bit already, but finding that balance,
Hmm.
there might be some people who are probably like maybe really anal about collecting everything.
Hmm. Hmm.
Investors probably more focused on useful metrics. How do you find that kind of balance?
Hmm. It's very, very hard. The unhelpful answer I'll give you straight away is collect what's useful. But of
Yep.
course, that's not a very good answer for anyone listening. Um, so when in my earlier days of my career, I would always err on the side of collecting more, and I still generally think that's not a bad idea.
Hmm.
But ultimately, data is kind of a pain to manage. So if you collect everything, and I really do mean everything, you're collecting, you know, whenever you've changed something in a database, every time you sneeze, every time you click on your computer, you're just
Right.
going to have a huge repository of data that's just becomes ultimately impossible to work with.
Hmm.
Is that you've collected too much. And now when I talk to a lot of my clients, I say, hone in and focus on kind of 2 angles. The first angle is what's immediately useful to you. And the second angle is really what doesn't scale with your business. So
Mm.
let me kind of talk about those separately. So what's immediately valuable about your business? Like what's immediately valuable? So when I recommend my clients to start collecting data, I go, well, if you've got investors, what are they going to care about? They're probably going to care about your financial performance. If you're not collecting financial numbers, you've got a bigger problem. But you should be able to get that out of your Xero or your MyOb or whatever your accounting software is. So I say collect that, maybe export that out of that system, have a
Hmm.
CSV file, have a Google Sheets or whatever, and build a very quick dashboard. And that quick dashboard will then serve really well for your kind of internal updates. Like talking historically about this crypto startup that I was working at, we
Yep.
used to present every single week on what are our users on the platform? What are they doing? How much money do we have locked up? How much money are we paying out because it was a lending product? And these metrics were really handy in kind of giving us a barometer as to how we're doing. So
Sure.
that's immediately valuable. That's kind of the first piece of advice is think about your sales data might be immediately valuable. What's your conversion rates? Your finance data is probably immediately valuable. And that's good. Collect them, use them straight away. Don't just collect them and put them in a back corner.
Yep.
The other side is what doesn't scale with your business. And this is a bit more nuanced. That, again, Matt, you work with startups all the time. You would know that the business in pre-revenue and the business in MVP is typically not the business at the 5-year mark. They figure a lot more out and they kind of scale a lot more. What you want to do is find what part of your data doesn't scale and kind of change in the same way. So someone might say, I want to collect every single click on a website. That may be useful, but that scales with your business. If you've got 10 customers a day at day one, you're going to have 1 million at day 5, at year 5. And at that point, this is a drop in the ocean compared to what you're getting in the future. So it scales. So I say, not as important, only collect it if you're immediately using it. But perhaps you have something that doesn't scale. Maybe you're a B2B sales, like SaaS product, and you only acquire one customer every month or so. And these customers spend tens and tens of thousands of dollars with you. That's a good example of something you want to collect a lot of data about. Because even as you kind of charge your customers more, because they use your platform or your product more, you're not necessarily going through more sales cycles. So that would be something to collect early so that you can do analytics on that as you go and make sure that you're, at the 1-year mark, you're able to look back and go, why did we get such a high conversion in the early days? What were we doing here? What was our messaging here versus what it is today? And kind of play around with that. That's probably my advice, generally.
Yeah, and I tend to agree, especially like if, investment is what you're after, or if you're looking at partnerships even, some of that sales data, the traction, like, capturing how locked in the user is into your like SaaS product is all useful info that you can obviously pass on to these potential, whether it's partners, investors.
And I think that's a good point. Like your usage is a really good example, which is when you're a B2C, you may get 100,000 customers using it for 5 minutes.
Right.
But in a B2B, you may still only have 10 customers using it for 10 minutes. But if you collect that longer, you get more, the same volume, but just stretched over time. So that's where you want to collect it longer rather than going, this scales with my business. Who cares? I'll collect it at some point in the future when I need it.
Yeah. Cool. Before we move on, there is one question. So, Aditya, I think it is. Sorry if I've messed that up. I'm facing an issue in integration of data as I do not come from a data background. Which book or are there any courses, probably any resources that you recommend to help people get started? I would say.
There's a whole bunch of good ones. I wish I could tell you all of them off the top of my head, but I can't. There's a really good data engineering one that I have in mind. It's like Data Engineering Demystified, I think it is. It's it's the book series that has the pictures of the animals on it. I can't remember who the publisher is. That's a really, really good one because that teaches you some really good basics like your medallion architectures. It teaches you things like how to think about your integrations. Like CDC is a good example, change data capture. Never heard of that term until I read that book, and now it's like a go-to for me for all my integration problems.
Okay.
That's a really, really good book. If you're going deeper onto like the AI end of things, there's a hands-on machine learning with scikit-learn, I think it is. Same publisher. That's quite a good book. And then generally, I actually recommend all of that publisher. I wish I could tell you what the publisher's called. All their books are really, really good. I think it's O'Reilly.
Okay.
They're really good books. Other than that, go just play around on YouTube. Like, I find that foraging for information to be some of the best ways to learn. So find a term, forage, see if you can find a YouTube video about that. That will give you some new terms to forage for that. It's a bit more explorative and a bit less, here's the answer. But I find you build a much stronger net of knowledge in your head and connections in your head.
Cool.
Hopefully that's a good answer.
Someone else has shared Fundamentals of Data Engineering by Joe Reese.
That sounds exactly right. Yeah, that sounds exactly right.
Cool. And do you mind if I'll post your LinkedIn profile into the chat? That way People can
Yeah,
kind of harass you.
I always take DMs. I put in the Small Business CTO podcast to DM me, and
Yeah,
I get them every now and again. So definitely,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, send me a
And
message.
yeah, if you've got any good, especially good resources to share, we'll add
Hmm,
that to the episode as well, of course.
of course.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, let's move on. Like looking at a bit on scaling, I
Hmm.
guess we've talked about it already, a little bit. But what are some of the bigger challenges you see startups when they're trying to scale if they don't already have that like strong data like culture already or foundation?
Are you talking about scale from an engineering perspective or like a business perspective?
Let's look at business first, and then maybe we'll look at the engineering side.
Sure. I think with businesses and scaling, often there's a few problems with it often. One of it is what got you here doesn't get you there. So, again, we're talking early days in startups. Like I love startups. I've run some less successful, some more successful startups. The early days, it's all about the chaos, right? You live in that. You live in. I'm in every. We've talked about it before. I'm in every sales conversation. I can keep tweaking my numbers, my messaging, my everything.
Yeah.
Once you get enough feet that you're out of the weeds and you've got the sales rep, you've got the engineer, you've got the operations person, then you can't live in that chaos anymore. Like you can't just expect that the person you've hired to have that same creativity and intuition of an entrepreneur.
Mm.
So that's where these startups try to scale without having information as to what's happening and being a bit more not rigid, but methodical about how they think about problems. So going, hey, I randomly priced my whole, 2 years prior to this point, but we should actually run the numbers and go, what are the conversion rates at different price points?
Mm.
If we say increase our prices by 25%, do we lose 33% or whatever the equivalent number is in sales? You might find you only lose 5%. Well, you got to keep adjusting your prices until you reach that optimum. You got to be a bit more methodical rather than experimentative.
Yep.
So I think that's one of the things I notice with startups is that they want the chaos, and then as they try to scale, they need a bit more structure to support basically offloading an entrepreneur's decision making and mindset into the
Mm.
business. And going in a different perspective, as they go to scale, you can do 5 hours of sales, 10 hours of engineering, 2 hours of ops, 3 hours of accounting, whatever it is, and make that all work. But as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you can't do it all.
Mm.
And I think that's where, we haven't talked about AI yet, but I think that's where AI is really good at that, which is how do I bake in the AI intern into my business and go, I do it myself for all my work and go, hey, I don't have time to handcraft sales proposals anymore. It's too hard. Like it takes me 2 hours, and those 2 hours I need to be on the phones calling another client.
Of course.
So that's where AI is really good to kind of scale and bring your business bigger and bigger and bigger. And it removes the somewhat of a headache of hiring people and trying to teach them your vision, teach them the way you want to do things. AI is really good at basically you build it and it roughly works and you can kind of continue to iterate on it and grow your business without then being bogged down in, I'm sad because I want to be a data analyst and I'm a data engineer. And there's less of those conversations. And it's more
Yeah, okay.
like, cool, let's just keep building towards the vision of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else to add on the engineering side?
Oh, on the engineering side of how do they scale? Yeah.
Mm.
So I think it's hard with answering the engineering question. I think in a startup, the way you design things is how do you build it as quick as possible and get it out the door as quick as possible.
Mm.
And then as you start to scale the business, you may hit some headaches with that. So code doesn't run fast enough, it's not secure enough, whatever it may be. I hesitate to tell clients at that stage that they need to listen to AWS, listen to Microsoft, listen to Google and say, we need the enterprise data platform, we need the Apache Spark cluster, we need the big data warehouse. I think a lot of engineering teams want to go towards these shiny tools and these tools that sell the dream ultimately. They say, we will solve all your problems, you will never have to deal with the bad parts of coding ever again. It's only ever fun from here. I think the best way to solve any engineering headaches as you scale, especially around like a data perspective, is just get your fundamentals right.
Mm.
I recommend a lot of my clients stick with a Postgres database. The top end of town, they're going to have a petabyte of data sitting in a Postgres database, and it works for them.
Yeah.
So why do you need Snowflake? You might need Snowflake, but you shouldn't look at that as being the first answer. So I think get your fundamentals right. Am I duplicating data, which is causing me a headache? Am I running this really inefficiently with my queries? Am I not just indexing my data in my database? Am I, trying to do crazy calculations, which would be solved with a much simpler calculation? I think scaling your engineering, I say get your fundamentals right. Make sure you're able to work at really efficiently at that simpler technology stack. Because the
Yeah.
more technologies you add, it becomes harder to hire, harder to train, harder to
Mm.
maintain, costs more. So I recommend most of my clients get a Postgres database, put on your indexes, get your joins right, get your tables right, and it works pretty well. You're probably happy with an answer in 5 seconds instead of 3. So
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
work with that.
I think it just brings it back to those like lean principles where,
Hmm.
you could do so much and, there's obviously so many priorities, but they're at competing priorities.
Hmm.
What's urgent versus what's nice to have word, which is what can be done next year. Like you really got to also work on that priority,
Hmm.
as well. So whether
And I
it's
think
sales data, whether it's the engineering side, I think,
and you make a
um,
really good point here, right? Like you shouldn't be so concerned about the tooling and being able to squeeze out the extra 10% of performance.
yeah,
Ultimately, as a data professional, your job is to aid in the core of the business. Unless the core of your business is selling a data product, you want to be going, how can I make your sales cycle better? How can I make your marketing efforts better? And I think if you are less about the shiny tools, you're more of that lean, you take that lean approach. It's
yeah,
going, I get this answer to you in 15 minutes instead of 5, but you only check it once an hour, and it's still going to uplift our sales conversion rates by 20%, which ultimately translates to 500 grand a year. That's a far better outcome, and then you can take all that energy and effort and put it in other parts of your business, like refining a user experience, refining a user
right.
interfaces, making stuff easier to maintain, more secure, more profitable, whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's right. And, because at the early stages when people are using tools like whether it's like Lovable or, their vibe coding, obviously scale is questionable or scalability is questionable and also security is questionable. But potentially people don't care at that stage. But as they obviously build out, it's the same
Mm,
kind of approach, I
definitely.
think. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, okay. So, and then finally, what does good data governance look like for a startup?
Oh, great question. That is a great question. Data governance is a funny beast. In a big company, so we're talking a top end of town, data governance is typically takes the form of what's even here? Like, what do I even have? Why is this data is sitting in a random SQL database over here? Why is it not, in our data platform? And the governance is much more of a cataloging and compliance, I guess, perspective. In a smaller business, you should really have a good idea of what data exists because you should be a much simpler machine, really.
Right.
So good data governance at a smaller scale to me typically looks like, can I access it? Like how do I access it? Have I documented that? So rather than trying to centralize everything in a data warehouse, you might be happy with a SQL database and a CSV export and a Google Sheets and go, have I documented where they are and how I access them and how I could access them different ways? So maybe
Mm.
through the user interface or through an API and talk about those different approaches. The other piece is just documenting, guess, what's there at a high level. So big companies might say, the user underscore text underscore 3 represents this thing, and you go that really low level detail. But I think at a startup, you should be a bit more thematic. So go, okay, if you want your finance data, it's going to come from 0. In 0, we have this, like we've got our transactions, we've got our P&L, we've got our balance sheet, we've got all this kind of data. That's where you'd get that. And if you're thematic, you're really getting that 80-20 answer of, I don't really care that user underscore alpha underscore 7 represents the time the invoice was received at. You don't really care about that. That can be solved at the
Yep.
last moment. That's the last responsible moment, that engineering principle. Instead, you're just saying, if someone turns up and goes, where is the data? Go, it's over here. So that's one piece. And the other piece of that is I think a good and important part of data governance early on is, what am I storing? How sensitive and important is what I'm storing? And how will I manage that and kind of recover that if there's some issue?
Right.
So if you, in your data governance, you should be talking about, this platform here has PII. It has my customers, their emails, their numbers. If you just note that, all of a sudden, if someone says, hey, can I access this platform? You're able to go, no, because this is really sensitive. So it's really important to document like your PII and your kind of sensitive data, and then go, if we were to do something with this data set, let's say we were to change platforms or whatever, what happens to this? Do we need to take a copy of it? Do we lose it? Does it get out of date really quickly? So I think maybe just tying that all back is, stay thematic on your data governance in early days. Don't go really low level and like build this beautiful catalog and a beautiful user interface. Put it in Notion, put it in a Word doc, say, here is the source, here's what's within it, here's how you access it, here is the owner of that asset. So that data asset. So it's our COO owns the finance stuff. It's our CTO owns our source control and our engineering and our AWS data and whatever it is. Just kind of stay thematic. I think it's the best 80-20 answer.
Yep. Okay, cool. We've got a few questions come up, but I think they're more likely to be addressable at the end. So
Sure.
Let's do that. Kind of looking for more topical stuff as we go. But sorry, Aditya, will get to your questions at the end. Hope that's okay. Let's look at kind of resourcing. So I've noticed a trend in my LinkedIn feed. More and more people now are hiring data scientists, data engineers. More people have been talking to us about those roles, and more people are recruiting in that space. So I definitely see the trends. But I guess maybe startups should kind of understand, what is a good time to start thinking about, when do they even need one? Or if they do, when should they start thinking about, even if it's a data analyst as a starting?
Oh, good. There's another good question. So I'm a bit of a counter zeitgeistist. I don't know if that's the right word. A counterculturalist of
Okay.
You don't need a data hire to get started. So I think, again, it's that similar thing of these big companies and these big organizations want to sell you the world and say, what you need is 7 data scientists, an AI engineer, a DevOps engineer, a data governance manager, because they've got their own agenda they're trying to satisfy.
Sure.
When you're starting in a startup, my recommendation is, let's start with a base assumption. You're not a data-centric startup. So let's say you are a startup that, let's pick something really simple. You connect coffee growers to coffee buyers. Really simple startup. Let's work with that example. You're not really a data-centric business. You're really just, you're a matchmaker. There's data in that, but it's not the crucial part of your business. In this case, I would say most of the problems you need to solve to start with, which is integrate my data, centralize my data, kind of organize it, and put it in a dashboard, can be solved with a back-end engineer. So, of course, that could be solved with a full-stack engineer if they're back-end preferred. But a back-end engineer can solve most of these problems. It's accessing APIs, it's moving data into databases, it's all things they know. Hiring a dedicated data professional is just adding more cost to your business, and it's adding more overhead to your business, like from a mental perspective, that you don't need. So I say, when you're getting started, see if you can make use of your existing web team. The technologies and the techniques and design patterns are very similar.
Yeah.
Once you move beyond that, so let's say you want to build a brand new dashboard every week. You want to get new data sources every week. It's a constantly moving target. It's not something that needs to be built once and looked at in 6 months' time. It's constantly moving. At that point, my recommendation is start with like a data analyst. It's going to be someone that's going to be very good at answering ad hoc questions, kind of building dashboards, some basic SQL, and you can have your web engineers kind of support them. Your web engineers, when a data analyst goes, hey, I want to have access to our finance data, the web engineer can pipe that into a database for them.
Sure.
And the data analyst can do most of the work. I don't recommend you go and get a AI engineer or a data scientist. Like, avoid the specialist, especially at the top end. They'll get bored quick, they'll get disengaged quick, and they just expect a lot more
Right.
support, I guess. It's a specialist role in that respect, is that you have to have a lot more of a team around them to support them. If your startup is a bit more data centric or you have a lot of data, so we're talking, when I say a lot, that doesn't mean a gigabyte, that means kind of like more than 100 gigabytes is your kind of data size.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, you might want to think about getting a data engineer. That's the other end of the spectrum. The data analyst is solving your data questions in your business. The data engineer is effectively like a back-end engineer, which is specialized in kind of bigger than memory, bigger than disk data problems. So at that point, get them. They're going to know all the techniques, all the ways to kind of solve bigger than memory, bigger than disk problems. But if your data's under like 50 gigs, you probably be fine with a web engineer. Might be more slow and less effective, but it's one less headcount, which is more money you can invest into your product, into your existing engineering team, into your sales, into yourself, into your marketing, whatever it may be. So that's kind of how I think about it. Maybe just a final caveat on that. If you're an AI-centric business, so let's say you're building a AI agent, or you're building something that's a self-driving car, whatever, something really AI-centric. At that point, I'd recommend your team look at a data engineer to support the data that needs to flow into an AI, and then probably an AI or an analytics engineer. Analytics engineer is a new and emerging term. It doesn't exist that much yet.
Okay.
But an AI engineer is a bit more mainstream. Get an AI engineer, and they'll be able to build the AI and do enough of the engineering work to, say, get under the 100 gigabyte watermark, and the data engineer can do the more than 100 gigabyte watermark and make sure all the data's there for the AI to consume it.
Okay. Cool. So we've talked about the kind of when. So if you are in that position, what makes a good quality? We could look at a data analyst and an engineer, maybe, if they were just starting out.
Yeah, what makes a good engineer? This is a hard one, because this is what a lot of clients ultimately pay me for, is to, how do you pick them? How do you pick them and get the good ones?
Yep.
I think a good starting point is, especially in a startup, is flexibility and speed of learning things. Like, Matt, you would know this, that LLMs and AI is, that kind of AI tech has only been around, like mainstream around, for 3 years, 4 years.
Yeah.
LLMs, I remember playing around with them in like 2016, but they were still pretty basic and all worked on a CPU, and they were these big GPU machines.
Right.
So that trend will continue to go. So when you're hiring a good data engineer or data analyst, focus on, are they curious? Are they flexible? Are they able to kind of work around new technologies, new problems, and new ways of solving things? And I think from a data analyst perspective, focus on perhaps domain experience or domain curiosity. So if you hire a data analyst and you're working in mining and they go, I hate mining, I hate it for whatever reason, you're not going to have a good time. They're just not going to want to care about the problem enough and kind of translate things enough and solve problems. So I would recommend domain kind of knowledge in that respect. And then from a data engineer, it would be a case of just flexibility. In a startup, you just need them to be flexible. So can they run the server? Can they run the pipeline? Can they get into the database? If there's a data engineer saying, I only work on Apache Spark and I won't touch any of the infrastructure, someone else needs to do that for me, you're not going to have a good time. So that's kind of how I think about it, is look at that curiosity. I think that's a really good answer. And obviously, so like soft skills, super important in a startup, because it's just that translation. There's fewer layers of people to translate. So having soft skills is really important, that the analyst can talk to the engineer and the analyst can talk to the executive and translate that well.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the approach you take for any software engineer, I think. I think we always say curiosity trumps technical talent, because if their ability to solve problems means that they should be able to figure it out in some way, whether it's using AI tools or some other approach, the curiosity will always enable them to be able to level themselves up autonomously, hopefully without any kind of guidance, or maybe with a little bit of support. So makes
I think
sense
like a data engineer, data analyst, all of these roles, they're so similar to standard engineering. There are
Yeah.
some distinct differences, don't get me wrong, but they're so similar. And I think for a very long time, the kind of engineering world tried to treat them separately. And I think that was a self-inflicted goal that the statisticians wanted to be data scientists and kind of stand away
Right.
from all the hard work. But it's much like the full stack, how the full stack industry kind of emerged. That
Mm.
back in time, statistics and analytics work was so specialized that you could just be good at only that. You could be an academic in that respect.
Yep.
But and that's much like how front end and back end used to be so separate because they were so specialized. But I think data and analytics has started to merge a lot more with engineering, and that's why I think, to your point, the things you look for in an engineer should really look the same for a data professional. They're,
Yep.
it's becoming more of an engineering discipline and less of a I sit in my White Castle and I lord over all these lowly engineers who do my bidding.
Right.
They need to get their hands dirty. They need to be doing the hard work. So you want to be looking for those standard engineering principles and mindsets.
Yep. Yep. Awesome. All right, cool. Let's move on. So we've got one last section, then we'll open up to the audience for questions. So feel free to cue your questions in the chat if there's something burning, or even if there's something topical that we raise. Yeah, feel free to list your questions. We will get through them after we cover leadership and culture. So data engineering culture, how different is it from software engineering? I mean, we talked about kind of engineers having the same qualities like flexibility, communication skills, their ability to kind of problem solve and be curious. But have you seen difference in culture across kind of these different functions, or?
They are. The short answer is they are different. And I think that you can't necessarily mingle them with engineers, like from a general perspective.
Sure.
Obviously, you can from a cross-functional product perspective, but not from a treat them all homogeneously.
Yeah, yeah.
The biggest difference with data and web, those two disciplines, is that data is by design a stateful engineering practice. So it's all about state. It's all about data. And if you talk to a web engineer, typically one of the hardest parts is state, and they often don't even consider it when they're building a lot of their solutions. They treat everything stateless as best they can. But data engineering is a little bit different, and data science is a little bit different. It's all about state. So I think one of the biggest things you need to consider when you're managing a data team is that just because their code works doesn't mean the outcome is right and the product works. It's because it's a data problem. There's going to be a lot more work in cleaning the data, organizing data, managing it, correcting issues. So I think there's that. There can sometimes be frustrating as a non-technical person or an executive to go, they built it, why is it wrong? It's because building it is 50% and getting the data and the state right's the other 50%. So you got to be a bit careful in that respect. And the other thing that I often talk about with my clients is that it's an R&D centric discipline.
Right.
So the web has somewhat been solved. Is that, we're not really going to rework the way we do things like React and Vue and Svelte and things like these design patterns and the standardization of HTML, CSS, JavaScript. That's kind of happened. Where AI and data are still a bit R&D centric. Is this model right? Should I use this approach? You'll do an analysis and get to the end of it, like I have, and end up with nothing. You would go, I didn't answer my question. I couldn't solve this problem. And I think that's the other thing to consider is that the data discipline is a research discipline. So when I recommend this to my clients, I say, make sure you time box the research because research is, I think it's Parkinson's law, which is the work takes as long as the time you give it.
Yep.
That you need to just time box it and go, hey, I want an answer. You've got 1 week. Of course, as a non-technical person, it's hard for you to scope that. So I recommend you lean on your CTO, you lean on perhaps other engineers, you get some fractional help to help you with that. But you go, hey, you've got 2 weeks to do this analysis. I don't want the perfect answer. I want you to come up with something in this time frame, and then you can assess and kind of iterate from there. So I guess that's agile in that respect. You make your research agile. You use that kind of technique of spikes, which is the research effort in an agile sprint. So
Yep.
do things like that. But I think you just need to treat them differently. They're state centric and they're research centric. So don't don't chastise them if it takes them an extra week because all these user IDs are nulls, and they're going, "Why the fuck?" Sorry, excuse my language. Why are they all? Why are they all nulls? They're gonna. You have to give them some patience in that respect.
Yep. Okay. Cool. And so if you're talking to founders and they're asking for kind of input on, if we talk about integrating them in different, like integrating, because you talked about obviously the cross-functional product functions, if there's only one data analyst and a couple of engineers, like is there a better approach to getting them to work better together or more optimally, or
Oh,
like,
great question. I have this term I use, which is like chaos engineering, which is you kind of
okay,
let it all be chaos within the engineering team. I'm
yep,
currently writing a blog article about this in my
okay,
own kind of world. I think the right way to integrate them is to give them a strong boundary, but ultimately let them loose. So
mm,
a strong boundary and a strong alignment, I think, is the term they typically use. I think of it as like a goal or objective or a vision,
yep,
and let them loose. So engineers are typically actually quite good at working with other engineers, and I think that's obviously a cultural fit thing that when you hire, you need to find them. But
hmm,
generally, an engineer will work with another engineer more so than an engineer will work with a non-engineer.
yep,
So putting them all together, I think, is just giving a strong goal and a strong set of like responsibility. So you got data analyst. I want you to answer this question about the business. How can we get 5% uplift in our conversion in sales? So that's an alignment thing. And then
hmm,
you enable them and say, you have up to maybe 10 hours a sprint of the web developer's time for them to assist you. And you can obviously ask for special exclusions to get 20 hours or whatever you need.
yes, yes, yes,
And then you talk to your web engineers and you give them a similar set of alignment. Your main remit is the product, you've got to build all these things. You will be asked to do up to 10 hours for this person upon request. Give them that alignment and then let them loose. Engineers are really good at self organization and they'll solve problems better than you can prescribe from a top level.
mm,
So I somewhat recommend you commingle them, especially in a startup, and you don't isolate them. Better still, the user facing engineer, so the data analyst, the user facing engineer, put them with the users. Don't get them away from the users. That's that whole thing of, giving them strong alignment and letting them be chaos. You
yes,
say, go talk to the users, go talk to your end stakeholders if it's a sales team or whatever, and go, how does it work? Let me ask the questions. Let me be curious. Use that curiosity that you hired them for and let them kind of figure it out. But I think autonomy is probably another good summary. So give them a lot of autonomy, give them a lot of freedom to solve a problem, and
yep,
rely on that chaos. The engineers thrive in it if you have strong boundaries and nets to catch them in case someone tries to break production.
yeah,
But give
sure.
them the freedom to kind of explore problems.
Okay. Well, I mean, you're kind of empowering them to lead their own
Yeah,
journey as well in some respects.
yeah,
And
exactly. And that's what you're paying them for. Because if you just want to puppet someone, go get an AI, go pull the
yeah,
strings of someone else.
of
You're
course.
paying them because they're smart. So enable them, and that's why I use the term chaos engineering. Is that
Yep.
it's a good bar to set with the executive team of this will look like chaos, and you will be letting go of things. But chaos engineering is the most efficient and effective. Enable them, empower them. I think, unfortunately, the term of empowerment it's kind of lost a bit of meaning in the engineering culture because we're going to
Mm,
empower engineers and then they kind of hamstring them. So I instead go
right.
the other end and make it more of an empowered negative term of chaos. And the
Yeah.
engineers get it. And they go, yeah, I get what you mean by chaos. And the executive team then know my job is to let go and set the boundaries. That's
Yes.
it.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I like that um, explanation. So, yeah, I think we've covered a lot. So maybe we'll
Mm.
hit some questions. So yeah, if you are watching, you do have any burning questions, now is a good time to ask. We've got got three questions waiting. So first one, yeah, sorry, was there anything else you wanted to cover before we do that? Is that all good?
Me? No, I'm
Yeah.
happy. Ask
Okay, cool.
away.
Sweet. So how do you keep up with evolving technology? I'm assuming that
Mm.
means in the data realm, realm of data.
Yeah, so this is where I'm very lucky I'm naturally curious about this industry. But I think that's probably a good starting point is be curious. So what I have, and this is actually a general recommendation to all engineers that I talk to, is
Mm.
I have this repository on GitHub, which I call the Menagerie. And the Menagerie is just full of random things that I have built and that have interested me.
Yep.
So, as a starting point, how you keep up with the industry is to constantly tinker. You don't need to build portfolio pieces, but go, hey, Google has released ADK. What does Google ADK look like? If
Mm.
you keep touching these things as you go, new technology starts to rhyme with old technology a lot and go, how they're solving this problem looks like this problem. That's kind of how you stay on top of things. It's somewhat impossible to know everything, but it's good for you to have these strong mental models which you can then apply. More generally, on top of that, meetups are awesome for finding things you don't know. So go to a meetup, someone will say things like that, a good example was I was at a meetup last night and someone was talking to me about building this crazy SQL orchestration tool to manage all of these SQL scripts. I went, have you heard of DBT? No. That's a great way to learn of new tools. So go to
Yep.
meetups,
Yep.
talk to people in the industry. Other than that, find some good content creators. So Fireship IO on YouTube. He used to do a lot of good content. He does a lot more news centric content now. But there's lots of good people. Like I think Network Chuck is another guy I used to watch a lot when I was learning. He would just
Hmm.
talk about a lot of technologies. So find a few good content creators. They're going to have their finger on the pulse, or in this case, using the right word, they have they're on top of the zeitgeist. If I use it correctly this time,
Yep.
that they will see what's coming out and make content about it. So then you can just consume a bit of that as your downtime if you enjoy it.
Yes.
Like ultimately, that's
Yes.
the beauty thing. If you enjoy your work, you consuming content about work is actually fun. But
Yep.
generally, stay on top of it that way. Find your content creators, go to meetups, network with people, and then just tinker.
Yep. And I mean, you raised like two cool points, like, that curiosity factor again,
Mm,
but
mm,
also like knowledge sharing in meetups should also happen in the startup. And
mm.
so, um, never gatekeep info. I did a post about that today, but anyway, um, yeah, like sharing knowledge is key to helping everyone advance, I think. So yeah, it doesn't have to just happen in the meetup. It can happen in your own
Mm.
friend group, it can happen in your startup, it can happen, yeah, in your Slack channel with all the other devs that you know. So
I think
yeah,
that's a great point, right? Like the whole engineering discipline, why we're so valuable and so good at what we do is because we have a culture of sharing.
right.
So when you're learning, you consume free content from someone that spent their real time making
Right.
something for you. So
Yes,
make sure you need to sow back into that field. You
that's right.
need if you're going to take from it, you need to be sharing your knowledge with people. You're going to need to create content, talk to people like you will just if you give everyone wins. So yeah, don't
Yes.
gatekeep. Ultimately, as I say, the hard part is the doing, it's not the knowing. It's easy
Yeah.
to say just use AI, bro. That's easy. The hard thing is knowing actually how to get there. So
Yeah.
don't gatekeep, share it all. Great point, Matt. Great point.
Future challenges in the data realm. What do you see or what do you anticipate?
Oh, future challenges in the data realm. I think there's this slow push towards unstructured data. So
Mm,
we've always had it, but we've somewhat ignored it. So great
okay.
examples are things like the web. The web is
Yeah.
effectively an unstructured mess.
Yeah.
And for a long time, there's whole industries that popped up, which is I scrape the internet and I make it structured for you to then use. So I think this is where I think about my career. In the early days of my career, everything was structured, everything's database centric. It's easy to build these statistical models. But as we get further and further along, everything becomes a lot more unstructured. And I think things like LLMs are another great example of that, that everything it spits out is effectively unstructured. But
Mm,
it's so useful. So I think one of the biggest challenges with data engineering in the future is how do we manage that? How do we optimize that? How do we deal with that? Because you can't just consume from raw text the thing you want and throw it away because in 6 months' time you wanted something else from that and you can never recover that.
yeah.
So I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges is how do we deal with unstructured information? And I think that's where stuff like having vector stores is a great example of that will start to take unstructured content and say, chuck it in a vector store. Yes, the exactness of what that used to be is gone, but the concept of it remains. I don't know. This is all kind of pie in the sky, sci-fi-esque. So I think if I was to recommend how to think about the future of data engineering challenges is
Yeah.
how to deal with unstructured, how to manage it, how to move it, and then how do you make that closer to the stuff we're good at, which is structured data.
Yes. Okay. Interesting. Interesting take. Hopefully that answers both your questions, Aditya. Let's move on to Gaurav. So he's asked a bit of an interesting, very specific question. Hey, Kale, good session. Your approach to steps if you're working for a startup and are migrating from one client management system to another application. Can you read
Awesome
it?
question. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's
Going
that's
forward,
a
the new application is used as front-end application to input data into the OLTP. Now, data engineer perspective.
great question. Data migrations. I have messed so many of these up over my career. The number one thing I recommend is phased steps and reconciliation. Because I used to be, let's just turn it off and put the new one in. All is good. It's migrated. It's over. Let's move on. No way. I've made so many mistakes doing that. The right answer is if you've got, say, A to B, and now you're trying to do C to B, start by keeping this alive. Keep it alive, maintain it. This thing works. People expect what's coming out of this. Build that C to B and try to emulate exactly what comes from A to B. So, and you may hate this. You may say this table is dumb. It's got these useless columns. It's got this weird logic in it. I hate how it's structured. You shouldn't care. Don't worry about it. Emulate exactly what comes from A. Then, once you've done that and you've reconciled these, so that's the reconciliation stage, do these exactly match, or as best you can, whatever that means. Then, turn off A, keep it still to that really janky, ugly structure in your migration. Then go away and kind of erode inside of that and make it nice and clean, and then change the other side at the same time. Bolt it to the new system, get rid of the old ugly system. So it's kind of a multi-stage process that you replicate, you reconcile, then you fix the other side of the equation. So
yes.
That's how to think about it. And reconciliation the whole time, schema reconciliations, content reconciliations, like sums of stuff, if it's like financial data or whatever. Just reconcile, and get super close to your stakeholders. So it's impossible to do reconciliation and a migration in a vacuum, as much as the executive team may want you to be. You've got to work really close with your stakeholders and go, is this right? Check if it's right. You've just got to find a way to make that not a lot of work for them. So give them a report, give them a number and say, the number is 2,722. Is that right? And they go, it should be 23. Cool. And then you can kind of keep going through that cycle.
Yep.
So just work really close with them. And that's exactly how I would think about it. And then just try and have good practices. So if you're switching to a new tech, like a new, say, client system, like an upstream system, try and upgrade your tech if you can, because that's the best time to do it. So if you're doing batch 24-hour copies of data in the old system, in the new system, maybe consider more of a change data capture approach, incremental, because that's the best time to upgrade. It's really hard once it's in place to do all these upgrades. So do it in that migration, and it'll kind of keep some interest for you. So you're not going to pull your eyes out of your head going, oh my God, all I'm doing is migrating data and it's so boring. You can at least keep your skills sharp and kind of upgrade the stack at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Next question. Hopefully that answers your question. We move on to Bijil. He's got two. So first one is, outside of big enterprises, do you see early stage startups and small business that has some of these discussed pain points typically benefit from hiring fractional data teams or experts?
Yeah, I do. So in a big org, you somewhat need a dedicated data executive of some respect. If it's a mid-tier org or a very small data presence, you might just need a general manager or a head of data. But if you're a technology company, you need someone that is just thinking about data things and AI things. In a small business, there's just not that much work. There's typically not that much data work that needs to be done. And I think one of the biggest learnings I've had is that if you overhire for engineers, they start to invent imaginary problems and over-engineer stuff.
Mm.
So that's in a similar vein to hiring a full-time technology executive. If you're in a startup and you don't need that much technology, you're the person that connects coffee growers to coffee drinkers. If you hire a full-time tech executive, they're going to over-engineer everything. They're going to put their fingers in stuff. They're going to just be like, we need LLMs on the, in the underwater, whatever it is. They're going to be going crazy. So fractional is a really good way to prevent that. Because a fractional executive goes, hey, I've got 1 day a week or 1 day a month. I'm picking the number one thing we should be doing. So that's kind of why I would recommend fractional help with startups, is that you're not going to be distracted by someone that wants to either do resume-driven development or they are just bored and trying to be useful and anxious about it.
Yep.
If you get fractional, they're just going to be like, you've got me for 1 day. We're going to do the only important thing. And I think it's much better. So that's what I'd recommend. And it's also good if you have an engineering team. If they are wanting to over-engineer, having a fractional executive means they're just able to rein that in and go, guys, you're over-engineering this. I'd rather you sit here and be idle than you make our stack more complicated and make it harder to maintain and more expensive to run. So let's go with a simple answer and then go develop your hobby project for a week until new work comes out.
And the other thing I've seen, like fractional, and kind of Jill like alludes to this point about like setting a strategy and blueprint for hiring, like fractional. I guess it's fractional no matter what it is. I mean, we deal with CTOs, so fractional CTOs, and a good like use case is when they're working with a non-technical founder who has no idea what they're looking for in a technical co-founder, and really they can kind of provide that insight, especially if they're looking at technical capability, but also, what should a tech leader or tech partner, if you're going to partner with someone, be, what should they be looking for? So just providing that second kind of course, they can help with the resourcing roadmap, but to help with the interviews, I think, and then kind of ultimately just together you can make a decision as to, who's the right fit, who's the wrong fit. Ultimately, it becomes a wedding and a marriage in the end. But yeah, I think definitely fractionals can definitely provide a lot of value in the strategy and the blueprint of hiring in no matter what capacity, I believe.
And I think you make a good point there, Matt, that this always surprised me when I started to talk to more non-technical people, is how many businesses blow up because they went, oh, my engineer went rogue or they overbuilt something or whatever. And I think you make a great point, which is fractional help is really handy at just catching that early.
Yes.
Going, hey, you're about to pick up a co-founder where I am getting the vibe from them that they are here to fleece you or to build whatever they want. They're not here to solve the problem.
No.
Having fractional help, even when you get that full-time co-founder, technical co-founder, having just a technical advisor to go, this is, they're just kind of doing something that's totally off kilter here. Let's get all in a room and talk about it and figure out what they actually are trying to do and pair it off. Because it could be experience, like inexperience. It doesn't have to be malicious. It's just, it's good to have fractional help to avoid that problem.
Yeah, that's right. Any other thoughts you want to share about the strategy or blueprint for hiring?
No, I think that's pretty good for now. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions in the audience? Your kind of last chance before we wrap up. Yeah, so
some good
do you
questions.
want to kind of go back and cover off what were the key points that you think we've covered today? Like if we think about where to get started, scaling and governance, hiring and culture.
Yeah, I would say probably my key things that I get across to my clients is the world wants to sell you a more complicated answer than what you need. So keep it simple, stupid. It's a big thing that I push for. So what tech you have will probably solve the problem. It won't be the best, but simple is better than complicated.
Yeah.
Other kind of things is you can get away a lot with web engineers. Only think about hiring data professionals when there's a serious need for them. And in a lot of ways, I would recommend you get some fractional assistance with that, or I recommend you talk to people in the industry, get a second opinion, and say, do I really need a full-time dedicated data professional? And if you do, pick the generalist over the specialist. You don't want the person that's got a PhD in building large language models. You need the scrappy, 10 years in startups. I've worked all across the stack. That's kind of what you need. And I think, yeah, just generally hire for curiosity, hire for domain expertise, and treat them much like any other standard engineer. Just know that they're going to have some unique challenges that don't apply to the web guys as much.
Awesome. And any other advice for like non-technical founders out there who, I mean, we've got a few about how to keep up or how to learn or how to anything else that you think that they can benefit from?
Make friends with technical people. That's probably the number one thing. Technical people are so friendly and they're
Yeah,
always willing to give away knowledge for
yeah.
free. Like to the point we're talking about us all sharing and not gatekeeping.
Right,
You know,
right,
I
right.
do a lot of just goodwill conversations with non-technical people and they go, "Hey, I'm thinking of hiring someone. Should I? Hey, I've got someone recommended I build everything in Rust. Is that a good idea?"
Yep, yep.
It's good. That's probably the thing I'd recommend the most is that you as a non-technical person will never be an expert at tech. You've made a decision and it's the right decision to not try and do both. So go make friends, find some allies in the industry, and they're going to be able to just give you a second opinion and help you, especially in the startup ecosystem. We all help each other. We're all competing against the big end of town. So make friends, someone will help you.
Cool. And yeah, I can definitely vouch for Kale. He's helped me with two people so far, and
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
more, definitely more on the way. And yeah, if you are looking to hire an AI, ML engineer, or even someone in data, we do have that capability in Nepal. And if you need an extra pair of eyes on resumes, always talk to Kale as well. So.
Definitely.
Thanks so much for your time. Looks like there's no more questions. Appreciate all the insights. I learned so much because I have no idea when it comes to data, I feel. So I'm scratching. We're just scratching the surface here, but hopefully that's a good, one-on-one for people, non-technical and technical, on data and startups.
Yeah.
So thanks again for your time. Reach out to Kale if you're not connected already, and we'll see you in the next episode with Carl, where we're looking at no code and AI tools. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.